Luke Allnutt is a senior journalist at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. The Englishman's career will enter a new and exciting phase in early 2018, with the publication of his gripping debut novel, We Own the Sky, which has been sold in 30-odd countries around the world. Our tour of Luke Allnutt's Prague begins by the Vltava River, on the embankment known as Naplávka.
This part is just somewhere where I love, because I finish my runs, but always under the railway bridge. I often run on a Saturday morning and finish here and then walk through the farmers market. And generally I just love Naplávka because I think it's just been a great example of urban regeneration and how a city can change sort of in the last 15 more now years that I've been here.
And the Naplávka has become transformed by all these bars opening and the farmers market.
Yeah, exactly. The bars, the farmers market, but also there's just, people just come and sit down here with wine, and it's a kind of egalitarian place, and it's pretty beautiful just looking across at the big tall houses over at Smíchov. It's just a really, really nice place to come and chill out. I don't come down here that much in the evenings. It does tend to be more in the mornings when I finish my runs. So.
Do you always run the same route?
I have a few, but my main one starts up in Vinohrady and then comes down here to Naplávka, and then I run along the river, depending. I have various length runs, sort of 10s and 15Ks, but then I'll do a big circle back and then come back, always end up here.
I was surprised one time you posted a picture that you had been running on Campa, and I thought, who goes running on Campa?
That's one of my routes. It's actually quite nice to run through. If you go there early in the morning, it's very nice. But otherwise, it's just horrible with tourists. As is the Charles Bridge. Brilliant time to run, but you've got to go at like 6 or 7 in the morning. Otherwise, it's just impossible.
One thing I've noticed here, sometimes, especially when it's really busy in the evenings, there's a bit of conflict between the cyclists, like we see a cyclist passing us now, the runners, and the people just strolling about drinking.
Yeah, well, I have very strong opinions about this. I'm normally a runner, but I'm sometimes a cyclist. And I think often the cyclists aren't very considerate. I think they go too fast, and I'm a cyclist as well. For this part, I would make it between certain hours of the day mostly pedestrian and just have people walk their bikes. I mean, there's plenty of places to cycle. I'm not anti-cycling at all, and there's plenty. If you go further on down towards the maternity hospital, there's plenty of places to cycle. But sometimes, especially on the summer days, cyclists go way too fast, and it's incredibly dangerous. And also, pedestrians, everyone's guilty of being inconsiderate, and, families sprawling across both lanes is also not helpful. But they need to manage it somehow, because it can be pretty dangerous sometimes.
And have you found running that you've kind of learned about Prague? Because I definitely have. I run out near where I first lived in Prague, and I know it much better now than I ever did when I actually lived there.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you live in a city, you get used to your usual familiar haunts, and I think running is one of the best ways to discover a city. As is cycling, as is walking, but it takes me places. Sometimes I run around Nusla and little places I've never knew existed, blocks of houses I've never been to, cafes I've never seen, and it's a really good way to discover the city. And I'd always run in Prague, but I'd always lived in Žižkov and tended to do local runs, and for me, running down by the river was something I've only done in the last 5 years, and it's kind of been very eye-opening for me.
Are the cobblestones a problem for running here?
Not terrible. I try and run on the little bike tracks, thus annoying all the cyclists that I've just criticised.
If you don't come here in the evenings, maybe you haven't noticed this too much, but it seems to me that this place has become almost over-commercialised. The whole strip along here by the river is full of kind of heavily sponsored boats and stuff.
Yeah, I guess that's always the danger of the popularity of a place. I saw that there was the big Carol Gott exhibition.
Got My Life.
Yeah, Got My Life, which sort of seemed to be the death of everything, or at least the way that perhaps the early people who founded Naplávka and were the early ones here.
They were all kind of hipsters.
Yeah, so there is always that clash between, the hipsters, and probably, for the hardcore hipsters, Naplávka is already passé, but for a 41-year-old man who doesn't get out that much, it's still pretty cool, so, commercial or not.
From Naplávka, Allnutt and I stroll along the river before crossing via the Mostlegi Bridge to Újezd. There we take seats at the bar in the cozy Mexican restaurant Cantina, which has been a fixture in the district for 2 decades. Our guide explains why it's one of his favourite spots in Prague.
This is a place that has particular sort of significance for me because it was where my wife and I came on some of our early dates, and it was a place that we would come every New Year's Eve. I've always liked it. I think it's very underrated as a Mexican restaurant in Prague. It's always great service, great food, always busy, always hard to get a table. Just a really well-run place that's been here for a long time while others have come and gone. But it's one of those places that just has special meaning for me and my wife, mostly.
I've got to say, I first came here maybe 2 years ago, and previously I had expected it was going to be like a Czech-Mex place, kind of bland and boring food, but it's not at all.
No, it's great. I'm no expert on Mexican food at all, so whether it's Czech-Mex or Tex-Mex or whatever, the food's always good.
We had an intern at Radio Prague who was from Texas, and she did a kind of report about all the Mexican places in Prague and reckoned this was the best.
Glad to hear the validation, because I feel like I'm sometimes a bit of a lone voice in singing its praises, especially because everyone is quite big on this Las Adalitas place down in, well, there's a few now. But no, I love it here, it's great.
What's your relationship to this part of the city, to Újezd?
No relationship really. I've never lived down here, but I've always loved it down here. I mean, back sort of in the early 2000s, I always found that you could escape the tourists just by coming a few blocks down from Malostranska náměstí, and it was always this kind of oasis, especially in the summer, of shade and cool and surprisingly unbusy. Cantina added to it. There's some good bars down here. I just think it has a real atmosphere down here.
Were you ever a regular at the Újezd club, a few doors down here?
I went there a few times, in my youth and liked it a lot. And also, back in the old days, there used to be a Bohemia Bagels there, which I remember sort of fresh and new in the city and going there to hang out and, have a bagel and then go up for a walk in Petřín.
And do you ever come to this part of the city now, or do you often come here? Because for me, I like it okay here, but it's kind of off my map living across the river.
Yeah, I mean, I think I fall into that category as well of just staying and living in Vinohrady. I do try and come across here. There's also the Thai restaurant Noi that would sort of come to now and again, and there's the Balkan restaurant that I think used to be called Lukalu, if I'm remembering rightly, but I came to a few times. So I do try and get across here, yeah.
Apart from this restaurant, where do you like to eat? Where do you like to go out to eat in Prague?
Well, at the moment our standard place is Brooks on Náměstí Míru, mainly because it's got a kids' corner and we can just leave our kids for a couple of hours and enjoy it without being bothered by them. Kofein on Nitranska is a particular favourite, and Ukarelu. I mean, those would be the three places that would probably go to most.
The final stop in our tour around Luke Allnutt's Prague is the classic Czech pub Pod Petřínem. It's a block away from Cantina on the corner of Újezd and Helichova, and as the name suggests, beneath Petřín Hill.
It's a really good old school pub that's, as far as I can remember, not changed very much over the years, but it's always just been a good, cosy little place, a little oasis from the cold outside, and I've always loved it down here.
Also, it seems to me unusually kind of down-to-earth or democratic spot in this area where many of the bars were more expensive.
Exactly, and that's why I like it. I mean, you could be in like a hunting lodge somewhere in the foothills somewhere. It's just really old school, but it always has a good amount of tourists in here, but not too much. It's not overrun, just people coming in for a beer, and it's one of those like real nice little neighbourhood places.
You've been here, you say, like 18 years?
Well, yeah, I came in 98.
I presume when you came you weren't planning to stay here?
No, not at all. I wasn't not planning to stay here either. I just came, I studied Eastern European history at university and wanted to be a journalist writing from this part of the world, and came here, and like a lot of people did a TEFL course and taught English for a while, and then started working for Transitions magazine back in the day, and then started freelancing, and then just ended up staying.
Is there any, for you, downside to living in Prague? Is there anything you find lacking here?
Going back to London, what I love in London is the big city feel. That can get tiring pretty soon, but it is incredibly unique, and I do miss that. You go there in London and it's just so alive and packed with people, and sometimes Prague can be sleepy. I mean, when you're outside the tourist centre in the summer in the suburbs, it can be, even in Prague too, can be dead, and London's just never like that. So I sort of miss that perhaps, but that's the only real. I don't really see many downsides. The downside some foreigners talk about is that Czechs are unfriendly, and I've never really seen much of that. I think they can be standoffish and perhaps not the first to come forward, but that's never equated with unfriendliness for me.
Also, the things you're talking about, like in London, the excitement, maybe you might appreciate that more as a place to live in your 20s. When you get older, It's just nice living in a place like Prague for me, that you can walk everywhere. The pace of life, from my perspective, absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I agree. All those downsides which I mentioned, it's actually nice that it's a bit slower. And also, the problem with in a place like London, logistically getting anywhere, meeting friends, you're in a city of 10 million people and it's incredibly difficult. And when you're in Prague, meeting up is just much, much easier. Just logistically, it's a much easier city. It's got great public transport, and so the size is also a big benefit as well.
Tell us, in a few months your first novel is coming out. Is the novel related to Prague in some way? Does Prague feature in the novel?
Prague does feature in the novel. I wouldn't want to say exactly how, but the story is about a father whose son has a brain tumour, and the father is looking for a way to save his son's life. And part of it is set in Prague, but it's not really a Prague novel per se.
The guest in Ian Willoughby's My Prague this week was UK novelist Luke Allnutt. And that brings us to the end of our programme here on Radio Prague. If you have any comments, then please send them to us. You can contact us by email at english@radio.cz or on Facebook and Twitter. We'll be glad to hear from you. But that's all for now from me, Ruth Fraňková. Thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.